Good evening. Welcome. Hi. I'm delighted to invite y'all to SIU SOM's inaugural Story Slam. I'm Dr. Emily Carr. For those of y'all I haven't met, I'm new faculty in Med Ed and Med Hum, and this is my first kind of official performance in this community, which is awesome. So I'm a doctor of poetry, and I'm trained as a doctor of poetry, and I self-identify as a joyous, revolutionary arts educator with a mission of jolting non-poets into poetry they didn't know they had inside them, because we all have an inner poet. Some of us have just forgotten how to remember. And two, second part of my mission is to reconnect folks with parts of themselves they have forgotten how to remember. So I have had the joy of doing some of that work with tonight's storytellers who very generously have come to workshops, have done one-on-one coaching, have shared their stories, their experiences, their lives with me. It's a joy and it's a privilege. We've got nine storytellers tonight who are generous and brave. And I'm just super delighted to invite them onto the stage. So if you are perhaps feeling a little bummed that you missed out on jolting yourself into poetry you didn't know you had inside you, or reconnecting with parts of yourselves you have forgotten how to remember, don't worry. Tonight's event is just one in a very robust menu of storytelling opportunities that we're growing here at SIU SOM. Why? Storytelling is one thing that we share as a species. Some folks argue that it is our superpower as humans. I don't really want to go that far, but I would actually like to argue that storytelling is the antidote to our massive cultural dysfunction, and for that reason, hugely valuable. So I would like to thank the Dead Slammers, the poets. I'm calling y'all poets now. The poets, the medical students who are also poets, who originally envisioned this event and invited me to help them put it together. So Shri Patel, Meena Jain, Emma Johns, let's give them a big round of applause for having this vision. And then also the administrator and one of my new bosses who also invited me to undertake this task and who supported the students before I arrived, Dr. Sue Hingle. All of y'all are welcome to join us, Dead Slammers. We're a party of 6 right now, but we look forward to growing. So please see us after tonight's event. There are many ways that you can join in our slamming society. Storytellers. Let's give the storytellers a big round of applause before they come up on stage. It is a brave and generous undertaking. Finally, I would like to thank you all for coming, for sharing your time, energy, and attention with us this evening. Can we give the audience a round of applause? Let's do that. Yeah, all right. So tonight we're slamming Moss style, which means that our storytellers will be telling true stories, 5 minutes, mostly memorized, performed live. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to one of tonight's MCs. We're going to get started. Y'all ready?
Hello. Yeah, thanks for coming, you guys. So tonight's Story Slam is based off a moment of lift. So all our storytellers, we have faculty, staff, and students all sharing tonight, telling a story based on a moment of lift. We ask that you silence your phones, just to be respectful of our storytellers. I don't know if you guys are taking flash photos, but don't. Yeah, without further ado, so I'm gonna go ahead and introduce. Oh, and one last thing is, at the end of our event, across the hall in the Pearson Museum, we have some wine and some food for everyone. So stick around and talk to the storytellers after. Okay, introducing our first storyteller here is our very own Kelly Hurst. Kelly Hurst is the Equity and Inclusion Strategist at SIU School of Medicine. She's also an aspiring horticulturist and work in progress. She delights in the creation and celebration of art in any form, including that time that Lee Pace played Brother Day in that outfit. Tonight, Kelly shares the story, Waiting for the Night janitor.
Alan believed that you only meet 18 people in your life. You just meet them over and over and over again, which is why you can meet someone and you know them already. Alan told me that we had already met in Seattle, Washington, but the really weird thing is that he said it was a time before I was even born yet. I remember the night that we met because it was very, very late, and my children were already home in bed, and I was still in my classroom grading 6th grade essays. And I remember the night that we met because I was doing something that I was not really proud of, and it had this potential to actually make me really embarrassed in front of a lot of people, and you don't soon forget that. And I remember the night that we met because I was absolutely horrid to him. I'm not a fan of labels, especially the ones that were given to me since high school. The one that stuck the most was pregnant teenager, and even though that lasted for just a couple of months, it seemed to stick. And after that came teen mom, and even long after I was out of my teens, that one still seemed to stick with me. And some of them were just not kind at all. Slut, waste of space, drain on society. Even my teachers in my honors classes, right before they found out that I was pregnant and realized that that actually qualified me somehow to be in remedial courses. They said that I was a waste of space. So to prove them wrong, I went to college with my daughter. And I became a teacher and got a job, and I moved to a brand new place where nobody knew me, and that I could then begin to have brand new labels. And I really wanted to learn about who I was, and I did not like what I learned. So it was dark out that night, and I was engrossed in this essay, and Alan, the night janitor, walked in. And Alan looked like Huckleberry Finn all grown up. He wore overalls and a dirty shirt. He had maybe 20 teeth. He had gray, bushy hair on his head and in his beard. And he had those glasses that my husband, who's ex-Navy, would call BCGs, but birth control glasses. And he said, "Hey," and he was interrupting me, "which one of you teachers teaches about Anne Frank?" And I did not look up. Me? "Have you been to Amsterdam, where she was in hiding?" This made me look up. "What do you know about Amsterdam?" I said it just like that. I told you I was horrid. Because relabeling myself was already in motion, and I had decided that if I was going to relabel myself, I was going to be like the moms at the school, the yoga moms, and that's what I wanted. They were the top of the food chain, and I knew I wanted to be just like that. And what better way to remake myself than to start putting down someone else and putting labels on them? So he heard it in my voice, and despite that, he continued. "Well," he said, "I visited there at least twice when I was in Europe at the University of Leeds studying to get my master's degree." I was fully looking up now. I eyeballed him and his wastebasket and his broom and said, "What did you do with that degree?" "Did I tell you I was horrid?" He said, "Well, I taught English because I love books, just like you do." And he gestured to my bookcase. He became, despite who I am. Do you all hear that? I don't think so. Is it that? It's okay.
I'll have a solution.
There we go. So Alan became, despite me judging him as a book by its cover, a very dear friend. He was more than twice my age, and I found myself staying late on purpose, night after night after night. And what we did was we shared books in art and poetry. He introduced me to Muriel Sparks' book, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and I introduced him to Tupac, which he loved, and he said was one of the greatest poets of the century. He completed assignments that he found in my room, and then I would grade them for him. And he checked out books from my library that we would talk about later on. And then he started writing these notes, these 3x5 card notes that I had on my desk. And he would write me these notes. And I found myself rushing to my classroom every morning because it was like my birthday when I found one of them. And I would write on the backside back to him. And one of my favorite quotes from Alan said, hey, the day janitor thinks we're having an affair. You're not even 30 yet, and I'm in my late 60s. This looks great for me. Not so good for you. I'm so sorry. Alan taught me about charis, this concept of a group of people who help get you through life. And he said that that's when we met in Seattle, and that I was a 10th grader named Pam in his classroom, in his English classroom, and that he moved Pam to the front of the room because she was always making these under her breath quips, and he wanted to hear them because he knew that they were clever. One night at a basketball game, I saw Alan across the gym, and I waved to him, but he did not wave back. And the yoga moms behind me started talking about him, and one of them said, they'll just let anybody in here, won't they? And I heard it that time. That's who I was going to become. That was the top of the food chain. Those were the people that I wanted to be. And I realized this was a really big lesson for me. And I decided in that moment that what I was going to do was I was going to tell the students exactly what I was doing and exactly what I was learning. And I was not going to cover it up. I was not going to tell them that I was the great person here. I was going to show them the entirety of this mess about what I was doing, about this narrative that I continued to hear about myself and how I ingested all of it and then breathed out fire towards somebody else. And they were really, really gentle with me. And one of them said, you know, we all make mistakes and it's okay to do that. What are you learning? And I was like, gosh, it's really bad to hear your words come back to you from an 11-year-old. So after that, they all started writing notes to Alan. One night as I was leaving, the entire classroom was filled with notes on 3x5 cards that they left for Alan, face down on their desks for him to read. And eventually they convinced him to come into the classroom and be a guest speaker where he shared poetry and his own writing. And they wrote poems for him. They wrote better poems for him than they ever did for me. And I'm not mad because he was really marvelous. And I don't know when it was that I finally realized that what I had done to Alan was take away one of his labels that he had earned and that he had needed. And it was when I thought back to that very first night that we met, when I asked him this question, why did you quit teaching? And he answered me and said, I didn't. I just quit being paid for it. Why I saw it move.
Our next storyteller is Kenesha Green. Kenesha Green is a fourth-year medical student at SIU School of Medicine applying to OBGYN residencies. She's literally living her dreams and blessed to be on this path. However, when she was a kid, she dreamt of being a fashion designer, a Broadway star, a music teacher, or a choreographer. She also loved SpongeBob SquarePants. Did we mention Kenesha's in application season? So please keep her in your prayers. Tonight, Kenesha shares the story, Courageously Me.
For anyone other than a medical student, July is fun. Summertime means family barbecues, nice weather, and pool parties. However, for me, entering my final year of med school, July meant 12-hour days in the library preparing for boards, chasing down my letter writers like Usain Bolt, hiding from the Chase banking app after the damage of away rotation, and daily panic attacks because my practice scores just would not budge. I was days away from taking the most important exam of my life, and if the things could not get any worse, here comes an email from Cherie. Just kidding, Cherie. The email reads, "It's time to schedule senior pictures. Picture day is in 2 weeks." I reluctantly looked at the nest that spawned atop my head as I regrettably neglected self-care in the thick of dedicated study time. What was I going to do for my hair on picture day? The temperature was nearly 100 degrees. I had 2 tiresome sub-internships lined up back to back. Exams were coming. The government just announced that aliens are real. There's a submarine trapped at the bottom of the ocean. I don't have time to worry about my hair right now. Then, as soon as my downward spiral of anxiety came, it left. Wait, I know the cure for this. Braids. Box braids are low maintenance. They're perfect for the heat. I'll look good. I'll feel good too. Plus, I can take the time I would have spent styling my hair to focus on things that really needed my attention. I smiled, knowing I had the perfect solution. Right before I hit the confirm appointment button on my favorite hairstylist booking website, I stopped dead in my tracks. I remembered my senior picture would be sent to residency programs. This picture would be the first thing program directors saw before considering my application for review. What story would my senior picture tell? What assumptions would they make about me and my braids? Would I kill my chances of an interview before I could even plead my case? Would they trust me to remain professional? I became extremely aware of my Blackness and how others viewed it. It made me uncomfortable, nauseous, and utterly defeated. Could my hair get in between me and something I had worked my entire life to obtain? I was stuck. So I did what I always do as a first-generation medical student. I looked at my mentors. I thumbed through my contact list of Black and brown physicians, realizing I could not recall a single Black doctor with braids. Sure, there were some with natural hair and afros, but never braids. I moved to Google. My search history included, are braids still unprofessional in 2023? Black girl with braids in residency, professional headshot with braids, OBGYN with braids. After being unsatisfied with my results, I then asked virtually everyone I knew, would you feel safe in the care of a physician with box braids? I was met with mixed replies. The most common response was, yes, they feel safe, but they also warned me not to wear the braids for pictures as it may limit my opportunities. But one piece of advice struck me the hardest. It came from a girlfriend that told me that a residency program unaccepting of my hairstyle did not deserve to have me on their team. So I took a leap of faith. I wore the braids. And to be honest, I loved the result. I thought my senior picture told a story of confidence, professionalism, and authenticity. Weeks after senior pictures, I was once again met at the crossroads of Be Yourself Boulevard and Just Play the Part Avenue. I'm in the operating room at an acting internship at a program far away from home, preparing for the patient's entrance with the nurses, the residents, the attending physicians. Music is playing overhead, and a beat that's all too familiar begins to play from a Pandora mix. The song is Monster by Kanye West, featuring none other than Onika Mirage. Great. This is without a doubt a setup. The program directors themselves had to have sat in a dark room at a big table asking the question, how can we ruin Kanisha's day today? They had to have known there is absolutely no way my Black behind is not going to rap every single lyric to Nicki Minaj's verse to utter perfection. My first full sentence as a baby was practically, this one is for the boys with the booming system, top-down AC with the cooling system. So, without missing a beat, pull up in that monster automobile gangsta with a bad girl that came from Sri Lanka. Yeah, I'm in that Tonka color of Willy Wonka. You could be the king, but watch the queen conquer. I was met with a couple of side eyes, blatant disregard, and awkward smirks. As uncomfortable as it may have seemed, I felt at ease. Finding my professional identity while navigating these unfamiliar spaces is getting smoother with each attempt. I've begun to realize that refusing to embrace who I truly am undermines all of my work to this point. I cannot pretend to be someone I am not just to pacify those uncomfortable with diversity. I cannot truly be passionate about creating representation, as I claim to be, if I choose to not be authentically me. I can still provide compassionate, professional patient care while also being true to myself. So, in the famous words of Leanne Womack, if you get the choice to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. Or, better yet, in the infamous lyrics of Crime Mob, "Nuck if you buck." Whether it be the braids in your hair, the music you bump on the way to rotations, the Jordan shoes you wear with your scrubs, be courageously you every step of the way. Take every inch of space possible because you've earned it. Differences in culture are beautiful. Be Black as hell, unapologetically in your white coat. These are my moments of lift.
Thank you, Kanisha. Our next storyteller is Sue Hingle, but you may know her as Sue too. She is the Associate Dean for Human and Organizational Potential and the Chair of the Department of Medical Humanities. When she wakes up in the morning, she's excited to contribute to creating a world full of joy, connection, and thriving. Once upon a time, she dreamt of being Wonder Woman because her superpower is empathy and compassion. Like Wonder Woman, Sue wants you to know that you matter. Thank you.
All right, can you guys hear me? All right. So those of you who know me, you may know me as a successful physician, educator, advocate, leader, champion of wellness, but you don't know the whole story. You don't know what was lying deep inside of me until my moment of lift. It was March of 2017. I remember it vividly still, and I probably will cry. I had just been sworn in as the chair of the American College of Physicians Board of Regents. Really an exciting leadership opportunity with great potential for impact and a pinnacle in my career. The meeting was in San Diego, beautiful view of the beach and the ocean. My phone rang. It was my husband, and I thought I'll call him back later. But very quickly, right after that, I got a text message from him asking me to call him immediately. So I stepped away from the meeting to do that. One of our sons is on the autism spectrum. He was a freshman in high school. He had had a great year up until that point, but that day things changed dramatically. He had an autistic meltdown that was really mismanaged, and unfortunately it escalated. He was initially suspended, and soon thereafter we were notified that the school had pressed charges against him for assault and against me and my husband for failing to meet his mental health needs. So after serving his suspension, we were then notified that he was not allowed to come back to school, that he was being expelled because of violence. So let me tell you, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to meet my son. He's really this gentle giant. He has one of the kindest souls you'll ever meet, and he would never intentionally hurt anyone. However, he now had another devastating label in addition to autism. He had assault and violence on his record, and neither of the private schools in Springfield would take him as a student. So we found a school 2 hours away, and we made the difficult decision to split up our family. My husband moved with him, and I stayed here with our younger son. We thought we could make it work, and with the incredible support and sacrifice of our family and friends, we did make it work. Despite me traveling 2 to 4 times per month for the ACP, we succeeded. He graduated from high school in May of 2020, and we were reunited as a family. May of 2020, COVID. So we went from living separate lives to being together 24/7. That was a really difficult time, but again, we made it work. We succeeded. So let's jump ahead to April of 2021. I went to donate blood, something I've done every 2 to 3 months for 30 years. And for the first time, I was denied. My heart rate was 150 and it wouldn't come down. I actually wasn't worried about it. I had a history of Graves' disease and I thought that was back. My thyroid workup was normal. I underwent a full cardiac workup, which was also normal. So my mind was now at ease that my heart was okay, and I went back to our new normal. What I was doing was avoiding the obvious challenges really staring me straight in the face. So a few months later, during a conversation with a colleague and friend, I was called out as being a hypocrite. This, ironically, was my moment of lift. Here I was, the Associate Dean for Human and Organizational Potential, working to facilitate individual and organizational wellness and thriving, yet I had gained 70 pounds in 5 years. I had a resting heart rate consistently above 120. I was pre-diabetic. I had persistent anxiety and insomnia. I had intense self-loathing, intense feelings that I had failed my son, my family, my work community, and myself. And I was avoiding dealing with it all. So after deep introspection over the next few months, I began my journey to finding myself, respecting myself, and loving myself. I learned how to care for myself and that must come before caring for others. So over the past 2 years, I've lost 50 pounds. I'm no longer pre-diabetic, and I now have a resting heart rate around 50. I've learned other things that I want to share with you. So first, I want to share that failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. Fail, F-A-I-L, first attempt in learning. Failure is not bad. Failure is where growth happens. I also learned that life is about habits. You need to learn how to create habits, how to sustain habits, and that our happiness really depends on the habits that we cultivate, especially the habits of our mind. And so we need to really cultivate healthy habits. I also learned that you can have it all, but it usually comes with great personal costs and consequences. You know, I've always intellectually believed that we're better able to care for others when we care for ourselves, but I'd never experienced that. What that really meant on a personal level, a spiritual level, sort of an existential human level. And I now have. And I now don't only believe, but I know that I'm a better mother, wife, sister, friend, physician, educator, leader, a better everything, because I've truly committed to loving and caring for myself. I have a new favorite mantra that I employ when I'm about to make an unhealthy decision. And unfortunately, this happens more often than I would like. But I say to myself, my commitment to myself is unbreakable. My commitment to myself is unbreakable. My commitment to myself is unbreakable. And I hope that you too will make that same commitment to yourself. Really imagine the potential if we all made that same commitment. And finally, the act of lifting others up has an incredible ripple effect. If my colleague had not cared enough to talk with me about what she was seeing, I wouldn't have had this opportunity to heal and to grow. And by doing this, I'm now able to do this for others. So coming full circle back to my amazing son, he has begun the incredibly important and painfully difficult work of understanding and healing from the profound traumas that he's endured in his life. And I'm better able to be with him much more fully on this journey and hopefully contribute moments of lift in his life. Imagine if we all took the time to lift each other up, especially during challenging times that require us to step outside of our comfort zones, simply because we care about each other. I will be forever grateful to Dr. Wendy Elamine for my moment of lift.
Okay, our next speaker is Jessica Durhacky. She's the Director of Employee and Labor Relations here at SIU. When she wakes up in the morning, she's ready to take on whatever the day may throw at her. Not surprisingly, she wanted to be a mad scientist when she was a kid and loved Frank Herbert. Oh, Frank Herbert's Dune series. Lady Jessica is pretty badass. Jessica is also a carpenter. Please holler if you need some woodworking. Yeah.
It's June 2014. I'm in my early to mid 20s. It's a lovely, sunny, beautiful day in Orlando, Florida, and I'm locked in a bathroom for 8 hours. I was working as a national traveler with the nurses union at the time, and they had me and a team of about 10 other staff living in condos just behind Disney. My then fiance, we'll call him Andy, was sitting against the other side of the bathroom door, absolutely exhausted from trying to reason with me. Andy was a professional political operative and grew up with a very affluent upbringing. I grew up in the extreme sports version of Appalachian poverty, was passed around through 13 foster homes from age 6 to 16 until I eventually ran away to go to college and escape Appalachia entirely. Now, being that my childhood was not a particularly happy one, I had developed a deep love of escaping into Nick at Night TV land. You guys remember? Yeah? Yeah. I Love Lucy, Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, Donna Reed. I could escape into the seemingly perfect, intact, perfect nuclear families with white picket fences and marriages that were still together and children who were not expected to mix mommy's boyfriend another screwdriver from the back seat of a moving vehicle. This undoubtedly painted an unrealistic picture in my mind of what a good life should look like. At this point in my life, I would have done anything to wash away the reminders of where I came from, like my accent or my obliviousness to polite society's expectations. For the record, I still have no idea which fork to use. If anybody could help me out with that afterwards, I'd appreciate it. Anyway, back to Andy. Andy and I had been together for 6 years, engaged for 1. I felt classier and more appropriate just by proximity to him. In my mind, Andy represented everything I had grown up wishing that I was. He even helped me correct my pronunciation of certain words and patiently explain things to me like, what's an RSVP? And why can't you swear at job interviews? I will, however, never forget the time I met Andy's mother for the first time, and she asked me if I was familiar with indoor plumbing when I asked to use their restroom. Appalachia, y'all. I thought about this all a lot during my 8 hours in the bathroom. See, Andy and I were supposed to get married the next day. But in the months and weeks leading up to the wedding, something just didn't feel right. I had this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach every time I thought about the wedding. And I'd had several conversations with our mutual friends. Everyone assured me that this was just the usual pre-wedding jitters. I had just had cold feet. I even sat Andy down twice and admitted that I didn't think I wanted to go through with it. Andy told me it was just my hormones talking. We had recently had several failed fertility treatments and the first of 3 miscarriages. So plausible, I guess. But I had started to feel invisible, like I couldn't trust my own sense of reality or emotions. And frankly, everybody around me kept confirming this. So I doubled down on my wedding prep. I assumed I must have been the problem, and I just needed to try harder, like respectable people. And respectable people didn't cancel their $15,000 wedding at the last minute. I convinced myself that this was the kind of thing only an uncouth hillbilly would do. And I needed to put my mask back on and pull up my big girl pants if I was ever going to be more than that. So the morning of the day before my wedding, it was Friday, and we had to pick up our marriage license by 4 p.m. in order to be legally married the next day. I remember very well waking up, taking my coffee to the bathroom to start getting ready, and then I caught my reflection in the mirror and the permanent look of sadness on my face. And without even thinking about it, I turned around and I locked that door. And I sat in silence. I did a lot of reflection throughout that day. I argued through the door. I cried. I argued some more. But without even really understanding why, I was determined to be heard and seen for the first time in a very long time. At 3:45 p.m., Andy gave up. He finally accepted this was not going to happen. And he quietly packed what few things he had in my condo and left. I was not surprised that there was a fair bit of grieving on my end for the next few days, even though I knew I had done the right thing and advocated for the part of me that had been silenced. I also wasn't surprised by the angry hate mail and letters and calls that I got from family and friends on both sides of the would-be aisle. What did surprise me, however, was the outpouring of support that came from some really surprising places. Women of all ages, including my own grandmother, reached out to tell me that not only had I done the right thing, and they were proud of me for the strength it must have taken, but that they wished they had advocated for themselves when they had experienced similar feelings but ignored them for the sake of fulfilling expectations. From that point on, I promised myself that I would always be in control of my own life decisions. I would always listen to myself and be sure that I was heard. And I learned that that terrible free-falling sensation that you get when you seriously wreck the entire trajectory of your life is actually incredibly empowering. You learn that you can not only navigate difficult choices by listening to your gut, but you will almost always end up better off for having respected and loved all of the parts of yourself. Today, I'm happily married with 2 beautiful children and an incredibly fulfilling career. Thanks, T-Dog. And I'm so glad that I made the decisions that I made and that I learned to exchange my shame for self-care and self-advocacy. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Suk-Young Suh. Suk-Young Suh, PhD, is a catalyst for change, a pathfinder, a pacemaker, a just-do-it-spirited hit-the-ground runner, a creative problem solver, and a former maximalist hooked on decluttering with a hidden talent in making natural skincare products. When she's not connecting the dots and downsizing, she likes cuddling up with her girls in their swing chair on the balcony under a soft blanket. When she was her girl's age, she wanted to be a news anchor, and she loved Winnie the Pooh, Dragon Ball, Slam Dunk, and Anne from Green Gables. When she was 15, she suggested changing the name of her high school to Seoul Foreign Language High School, and the principal did it. Tonight, Suk-Young shares the story, All the Languages I Know.
Sounds like it's raining. Okay. So, how many languages do you speak? I want you to think about this question while I share my story. I was in Scotland a couple months ago for the first time because I was leading a workshop about difficult conversations. And it felt really surreal to picture the room full of scholars from around the world because that was the largest international medical education conference in the world that I was presenting. And then because for the longest time, I believed that being a native speaker was a requirement to be a good communicator. According to my own reasoning, I couldn't be a good communicator in English because English is not my first language. And I realized that this belief didn't come from me. It came from a relationship from earlier in my career. It was my first year joining management consulting almost 20 years ago. Other than a couple of onboarding sessions, I really didn't get much guidance or a mentoring figure. So when I paired up with this manager, I was hoping that she could be my mentor, given our similar academic background. However, that wasn't the story. I remember I just got off to the office wearing a nice trench coat one morning because she told me to wear something more professional a few days earlier. And before even I had a chance to take it off, I was called into her cubicle. It was just another day criticized by her from the morning. And then I tried to hold back my tears when she asked me why I was making so many glaring grammatical mistakes. And I told her those were very obvious to me because English was my second language. And I ended up bursting into tears. And she looked at me annoyingly and told me, "Oh, you just can't do that at work." So later, I found myself in the bathroom, just crying, hoping no one noticed. I took a couple of writing workshops during the time, trying to improve my writing skills. Upon coming back from one workshop, I shared how the instructor was impressed by my writing, and then I got the highest score from the class. She couldn't believe it. So she asked me to bring my writing sample. So I did, like a little child, like so expectant to get some praise and validation that you really wanted. And then she red marked the whole paper and discredited the instructor. She didn't know what she was doing. And then she also questioned how I got my PhD, given she got the same degree from the same institution 20 years prior. We even had the same major. So I told her that there was editing and proofreading services to students. And then she surprised and told me that it wasn't your work. So this went on for 14 months, every single day. Her voice lived inside of me when I was not even at work. And much later, I learned that I was depressed during that time and experienced trauma from toxic and chronic stress. Thank you, Kimia Saraf, for making me realize that. The turning point was when one of the clients listened to my concern about my work and told me he preferred my emails over my bosses because mine was much more straightforward and easy to understand. The small act of kindness that he showed really lifted me up, and then recognized my boss's critical voice might not even be true. And that's the moment that I decided to say something nice to others whenever I could, to lift them up. Because you never know, that gesture can help them take the first step to get out of their pits. Many years later, a conversation with a friend of mine from grad school made me realize I still had her voice in my head. I shared my concerns about my lack of communication skills, and then he advised me not to be confused my ability as a painter with the effect of the bad brush. He urged me to throw it away rather than hold on to it. Another breakthrough moment came rather recently. About a month ago, a colleague asked me, has a question about her doctoral coursework. Her professor happened to be from the same program, so I was familiar with the content. After reading a few paragraphs, I kind of summarized in simple ways. So I said, you just need to focus on 3 things when it comes to needs assessment: content, context, and audience. She commented how I had the ability to distill complicated concepts in very simple terms. At that moment, I wondered if English, not being my first language, forced me to do so. These days, my work at SIU helps people communicate well and tap into individual and organizational potential. Now I want to extend those skills and experience to my own growth. I'm telling myself to listen to my voice and remind myself to lift others through languages I speak. I speak Korean and English fluently, and I also speak empathy, business, IT, healthcare, supply chain, leadership, and moms, especially some yoga moms. I even picked up some Southern Baptist while I lived in Louisiana, and then I started learning and speaking self-care as well. I am grateful for my dear friend and colleague, Kelly Hurst, you are one of my carers. And she helped me see my perceived weakness as strength and made me realize that my core strength lies in translating languages. I am the translator between people who feel frustrated because they don't understand what other people are saying, even if they all speak in English. Today, I choose to break free from the chains of toxic voices in my head. Now, watch me soar.
Thank you, Soo-Kyung. Our next speaker is Anna Chincholo. She is a professor of medical education and editor of Teaching and Learning in Medicine. She's grateful to move, to work out, to walk, etc. Perhaps not surprisingly, when she was a kid, she wanted to be a veterinarian or a horse trainer. Her favorite fictional character is Ted Lasso's Roy Kent. Roy Kent.
I was going through my divorce when I realized that I am not, in fact, a CIA sleeper agent. I mean, you could see how I might get confused. I'm on a surgical strike to the hair salon, Operation Grey Roots. It's from Springfield, where I live, to Champaign, where my life, as I then knew it, was ending 80 miles away. It was going to be in, out. No one, least of all my ex, would know I was there. Also, I was running late, as I'm wont to do, which added a little drama to the scene. Also, it's a beautiful fall day. It's got this deep blue, cloudless sky. It's crisp, but still warm. It's the kind of day we get twice a year in Illinois. Perfect conditions for flights of fancy. Speeding along in my little black Golf TDI capsule, I just might believe, contrary to what my ex had been telling me for 13 years, that I am good enough to do important things. I just need to be activated. Also, I already have a nemesis sleeper agent in my life. Placed in service 15, maybe 20 years ago, Alzheimer's disease has slowly infiltrated my father's brain, and its activity there is beginning to show. As my dad is losing his identity, he's slipping into the uncanny valley, becoming a spine-tingling, vaguely threatening, close but not real simulacrum of himself. He's restless, always on the move. He wants to be helpful, but he isn't. He's forgetful, distracted, inefficient. He's becoming sad and defensive, and soon I won't recognize him anymore. I'm sure I talk about dad and divorce at the salon, like you do. I have 90 minutes before the color sets, and People magazine will only take you so far. When I'm done, I leave the salon like I arrived, looking left and right, out like a shot. And as I get in my car, something feels off. It looks exactly like my car, black, manual transmission, but it smells different. There are sunglasses in the console and a jacket on the back seat that aren't mine. Is this my trigger? Well, sitting in that car with my key in someone else's ignition, I know, of course, I am not a sleeper agent. No hero awakened for a critical mission. I am just a sad and defensive person, and I don't recognize myself anymore. About a year later, after my divorce is final, I'm on a river cruise with my parents. 6 countries, Belgium to France. I'm helping Mom look after Dad, and I'm trying to look after myself, not exactly doing a Medal of Freedom job at either. Dad is wandering off into crowded plazas thinking he can navigate the restroom on his own. And my mind wanders into the thoughts of the emotionally unavailable men that I had welcomed into my life since my divorce, wondering what they were thinking of me. Answer, nothing. Well, one day on this cruise, we stop at a Roman spa. And the spa, being European, has unisex changing rooms. So each person has an individual closet in which they change their clothes. And as we're preparing to leave, we notice that Dad is taking a long time to get dressed. I knock on the closet door and I ask him if he needs help. And he tentatively says, "I think so." Thankfully, he hasn't locked the door. And this was a habit that he had picked up since he developed Alzheimer's disease, following us around the house and locking the doors on us. And in a moment of what I like to call delicious lucidity, he locked my ex out of the house. Well, when I enter, I'm shocked. Dad is standing there, holding his pants out in front of him with no idea how to put them on. His belt dangles limply from the loops. And as if someone else has taken over, I know in this moment I must protect his dignity, disguise my horror, speak softly so only he can hear me as I sit him down and hold his pants for one leg, then the other, and then gently fasten his belt. We both act like this is all completely normal. On that beautiful fall day in Champaign, I drove off in my own car, still just me, still living the life I'd made, not some mysterious person behind a desk or in a lab somewhere had made me for. But on this other beautiful day at the Roman spa, on this day when both Dad and I are feeling disoriented, alone, and a little scared, and in a quiet moment no one else witnesses, we rescue each other. I learn what it means to be activated.
Okay. Next up is Hannah Struck. Hannah Struck is the marketing associate for the Department of Internal Medicine. When she was a kid, her dream professions were photographer, songwriter, and music producer. Some strong women she admires include Madeline, Elizabeth Bennet, and Lizzie McGuire. She also loves the prospect of a strong cup of coffee. Tonight, Hannah shares the story Family Tree.
Can people hear me now? It's a weighty feeling to realize that you are the first person your dad has ever met who is his own flesh and blood. Growing up, I always knew that my dad was adopted, but it wasn't until some point in my teens that I realized that meant that my younger sister and I were the only people he had ever met who looked like him. Don't get me wrong, my dad has lived a charmed life. He grew up the son of a chiropractor and a homemaker in a picturesque small town, but there was always this giant swirling question mark around his biological family. It wasn't until after my grandparents had passed away in 2016 that we got our first clue. The name Ernestine Leroux Wojnarowski on my dad's adoption papers in my grandpa's safety deposit box. Now, there's something you should know about me. While I work in marketing, many who know me say that I have missed my calling. You see, I am that FBI friend. If there's something you need found on the internet, I'm your girl. If you're curious about that person you went to high school with that's no longer on social media, curious about if that guy you started seeing is as good as he seems, just give me a name, a nickname, a partial name, and I will be back in 1 to 2 business days with a wealth of information. 4 years spent working as a research assistant at my university library had further honed my skills. So I decided I was going to see what I could learn about Ernestine. Within a week, thanks to the magic of Google and several free trials from Ancestry websites, I learned that Ernestine had passed away in 1996 in upstate New York, but I was also fairly sure that my dad had a brother and possibly a sister. I nervously shared this information with my dad, and he gave me his blessing to continue searching, reminding me that this was my family too. But instead, I set my research to the side. It somehow didn't feel right to upend a stranger's life based on information I had pieced together from a Google search. A few years later, I decided to do 23andMe, and the results confirmed what I had previously found. I once again pulled out my file of research full of marriage records, old photos, addresses, and the family tree that I'd carefully pieced together. I asked myself, was it enough to simply have this information and know that it was correct? I decided it wasn't. I was still missing the one thing I really wanted, a picture of Ernestine. I decided to reach out to someone. I crafted a message to Dan, a second cousin who was also on 23andMe. My dad and I carefully scanned his adoption papers with Ernestine's signature and included a few photos of my dad and I who bore a strong resemblance to the family, hoping to offer some reassurance that we weren't trying to pull some bizarre internet scam. And I asked Dan for that picture of Ernestine. When I sent the message, I wasn't really hoping for much. I honestly was going to be surprised if I ever heard anything back, but at least I could say I tried. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Within a couple of days, I not only had a reply from Dan with the photo of Ernestine, but I had an email from my dad's sister, Nancy, and she wanted to talk. It was the most bizarre, exhilarating, nerve-wracking conversation to call my dad and say, "Dad, are you sitting down? I got an email from your sister. She's real and she wants to talk." What has followed in the last 3 years has been so much more than I ever could have hoped for when I first sent that message. What started out as a research project to answer a question about my dad's biological family has culminated in annual trips out to upstate New York to visit that family. We were able to meet my dad's biological father, Ed, and a year and a half later attend his memorial service. I have met so many new aunts and uncles and cousins that I literally have had to make flashcards to keep them all straight. And even though it took 60 years for our families to meet, there is an ease to family ties that you instantly settle into. The quiet, stoic nature of my dad is something that I now know that he shares with many of his siblings. My own love of art and desire to create is something that I now know I got from my grandmother Ernestine and share with many of my cousins. I've been told that I inherited the Leroux family nose. And this past summer, I had the chance at a family reunion to thank Dan in person for answering my first message. Because thanks to him, I not only have a new home base in Westport, New York, but my dad now has a family tree bursting at the seams with people who look just like him. Thanks.
Our next storyteller is Joey Mayako. Joey is a fourth-year medical student applying into internal medicine and hoping to be a future oncologist. Joey just loves the opportunity to work hard every day. Not surprisingly, astronaut was one of Joey's top professions when he was a kid, but bad ocular genes ruled that out. In no particular order, Joey's a fan of Samwise Gamgee, Hercule Poirot, Fred and George Weasley, and the Phillies. Go Phillies, beat the Braves. Tonight, Joey shares the story, More Cheese.
All right, so can everyone hear me okay? Sure. This story is about the impact in my life of unconditional support, and especially my relationship with my dad's parents, my Poppy and Nona. It starts in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My dad's side is from Philly. It's really like my home away from home. I'll quickly note, as Mina just did, my Phillies are thriving right now, so they played 707. We'll get there tonight. But this story takes place in 2016, just after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania. To set the stage, I'm someone who throughout their life has found a decent amount of success. I graduated from an Ivy League school, doing so with multiple degrees, including from the best business school in the country, internships at Fortune 500 companies, and after graduating, employment at a top biotech consulting firm. I thought there I'd climb my mountaintop. I'd gotten my first choice of job, was getting paid more than any 22-year-old reasonably should be allowed to make, got to travel the country the whole 9 yards. And I think in this job, I got put to work. It's not hyperbole to say I was working minimum 14-hour job, same thing on Saturday, maybe 4 or 5 hours on Sunday. And I think anyone will tell you there's a certain clarity that comes when you really get put to work. A distinct clarity on whether you really love what you're doing or whether you're really miserable. And at least that's the case it was for me. And for me, I was really miserable. At the crux was realizing, despite all these successes, I didn't feel successful at all. A disconnect between my vision of life and life itself. To state briefly, I'd entered with a perhaps romanticized notion of bringing new drugs to market, of great scope of impact, and quickly realized I was a cog in an engine for profit maximization. And climbing on that totem pole, no matter how far I went, would lead to any change in that condition. But worse than that was feeling like I'd failed in choosing my career, maybe even wasted my time in college. So transition to my grandparents, my Poppy and Nona, Umberto and Maria of Ridley Township. During this time, post-college graduation, I would go over to my grandparents' house on Sundays, where we started a new tradition of them teaching me to cook classical Italian dishes and afterwards having supper together. These lessons soon became the highlights of my week. We would get the aprons on, get some tunes rolling. Like any elderly Italian couple, they really loved Frankie Sinatra. We cooked so many amazing things that year, from risottos, bolognese, raviolis, tortellini, chicken marsala, you name it. We were making it. My favorite memory, though, is when we made a classic red sauce with 3 types of meat: sausage, short rib, and meatballs. And so we're making the meatballs, and in go the ground veal, pork, beef, the breadcrumbs, the milk-soaked bread, the parsley, some egg, and then the Parmigiano Reggiano. And my grandparents had their own specific system where my Nona would get the meatball mixture together and then fry just a little piece for my Poppy to taste test. And my Poppy's taste testing, and he looks at me, and he's got this mischievous little twinkle in his eye and exclaims, "Mare, it needs more cheese." So my Nona puts in another container of Reggiano. These containers are like, they're not small. Another container of Reggiano. Repeat, Poppy tastes, "Mare, more cheese." And this quite literally goes on until we've put 6 containers of cheese into the meatballs, and it gets my grandfather's blessing. Internally, I was like, "Damn, Nona, that's a lot of cheese." No wonder those meatballs tasted so good. But anyway, I digress. During these dinners, I really got to learn a lot about my grandparents. They'd both come to America independently of each other with their families from Italy when they were young children. My grandmother from outside of Rome and my grandfather from Abruzzo, truly coming from abject poverty. Resultingly, they and their families did what they knew, which was to cook. On my grandmother's side, the Stacchinis, her family opened a hoagie shop called Stacky's. And on my grandfather's side, it's a great source of Miyako family pride that President Hoover once complimented my great-grandfather's turtle soup. I confided in them my employment predicament. More so, I was thinking about leaving and going to medical school, which would require a big step back to the drawing board. Despite my own reservations and suffering self-opinion, in their eyes, I wasn't a failure at all. They couldn't have been more proud of what I had accomplished, and more so, that their grandson had options in life, and if we're being real, pretty good options. Most importantly, he possessed choice, which was more than they could have imagined in coming to Philadelphia. I look back on those dinners now, almost 7 years later, with the subtext being that I feel in this profession like I've got wings on my feet. In that time, my Poppy and Nona have both passed. During my Poppy's last months, during my first year of medical school, he was in late-stage heart failure, in between more and less lucid intervals. We had a priest come in to perform the anointing of the sick. I don't know if any Catholics here, but this was my first time seeing this sacrament performed. But with everyone and the priest gathered around, Pop becomes aware of the situation and make eye contact with me. And I notice that same mischievous twinkle in his eye. And he starts to sing. And now the end is here. And so I face that final curtain, which of course is the first line to Sinatra's My Way. We're all laughing, simultaneous with tears running down our faces. Those compound emotions that love so readily yields. That was just so Poppy. I think back to that time in Philly, deeply missing, but just so grateful for my grandparents, those cooking lessons, their unconditional support for a big life decision. I think in a world where it's a smidge trite to tell someone they can grow up to be whatever they want to be in life, their pride in me really instilled, and it feels a little crazy to admit this out loud, that there is no limit to what I can contribute during my verse, to feel emboldened to seek my passions, to go about life my way, and that in this metaphorical meatball called life, to never be afraid to ask for more cheese.
Thank you, Joey. Our last speaker, Jerry Cruz. He is the Dean, Provost, and Chief Executive Officer of SIU School of Medicine. He is an avid golfer, sports statistician, grandfather, and dinosaur collector. In 1989, he wrote an award-winning article about the treatment of pediatric fever and used the money to buy a French horn for his daughter.
Oh my gosh, that's true.
This is only the first of many accolades Jerry has received and aspirations he has made possible for our community. Tonight, Jerry shares the story, Convictions.
Thank you. I'm good, yeah. My dad was a grocery man. He worked for Temple Stevens Company, a chain of grocery stores in small towns in central Missouri. Butcher, store manager, produce buyer, general manager. He walked with a limp. He had a wooden leg from an injury in World War II, but he didn't talk about it. When I was in college, I came back to my hometown to get my hair cut at Logan's Tonsorial Parlor on a Saturday morning. It had a red and white striped pole, just like medieval barber surgeons, Theodoric of York, right? Nathan Logan had 3 chairs, but he always worked from the middle chair. But on Saturdays, on the right side of him sat John Gabbert, the grade school principal, who had a vast knowledge of everything and pontificated about current events, science, math, literature every Saturday morning. As a matter of fact, he was so good, they called him pedagogue. That's true. Anyway, he was sitting there one Saturday morning when I was in the chair, and he said, "Jerry, your dad was the best sharpshooter ever from Sheridan County. Yes, Elwood Cruz was the best sharpshooter ever." I said, "Pedagogue, you're wrong about that. We don't have any guns. He doesn't have a gun. We don't shoot guns." He said, "You go home and ask him." So I went home and I told him what Pedagogue said, and my dad stared at me and tears welled up in his eyes, and he said, "Let me show you something." So he went back to the bedroom and pulled out this, and he opened it up, and he held this up, and he said, "This is the Purple Heart. This is for being injured on the battle line." And he said, "Pull this out. This is what I'm proud of. This is the Silver Star. This is for gallantry in battle. Captain Jesse Cruz," it says on the back. So then he told me the whole story. Because of economic reasons, he and his 2 brothers had enlisted in the Army in 1940. He went to Fort Riley in Kansas, then Fort Ord in California. Private First Class Jesse Cruz. They called him by his first name then instead of his middle name. The colonel called him in and said, Private Cruz, we're assigning you to officers training school. And in 6 weeks, he came out second lieutenant, Jesse Cruz. And they made him the chief rifle instructor for the United States Army because he was such a good sharpshooter. Pedagog was right. For 4 years, his unit trained other infantry units in Patton's 3rd Army to come to the European theater to fight. D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, the whole deal. In December 1944, they called Dad's unit to battle. And in January 45, they landed in Normandy after the Battle of the Bulge. They marched through the Ardennes Forest, whose trees had been decapitated by artillery fire. They marched through the site of the Battle of the Bulge, and Dad said, you can't imagine what it's like to walk around 100,000 bodies frozen like popsicles. Then to the Siegfried Line. Jeep drove up, General Patton. He gave a pep talk to my dad's unit and gave them some instructions about pursuing the Germans across Europe to preserve bridges, the Remagen Bridge. And then at the end, he said, a man standing by his convictions will turn the tide for many. And my dad looked at me and said, that's my motto. I'd never heard it before. Anyway, he went out that night on a reconnaissance mission with 2 other guys, and he stepped on a mine. It blew to the right. It killed the man to his right, his best friend. His foot was shattered. The other person was uninjured, and he pulled him back to safety. He was airlifted to London, and then to a military hospital in Kalamazoo, and then to a military hospital in Denver. 2 years, they tried to save his foot. He said to me, they should have cut the damn thing off on the battlefield. Osteomyelitis, addiction, you know, the whole deal. So anyway, that's why he got the Silver Star. Then when he was 57, he had coronary artery bypass surgery in the infancy of that procedure. Over the next 28 years, he had 2 heart attacks. He had 2 pacemakers. He developed stage 3 or 4 congestive heart failure. Lisinopril, the new drug, he said, was the best thing that ever happened to him. He coded and was revived. And then when he was 85, he started to lose weight. He got an x-ray, and he had a lung mass. His doctor said a tumor. He told me that conversation scared him more than anything in his life, believe it or not. They admitted him to the hospital, and the pulmonologist, Dr. John Onofrio, did a biopsy and told him they'd have results in a day or 2. The next morning, Dr. Onofrio came back, and I was standing in the corner, and he said, Mr. Cruz, I went downstairs to pathology. I found the pathologist, Dr. Darko, and we both sat down and looked at your slides. I have some bad news. It's lung cancer, mixed adenocarcinoma and squamous carcinoma, and it's wrapped around your aorta and your trachea. He said, but the cancer doctor is right down the hallway. I'm going to have him come in and see you. As he left, Dad said, he cares about me because he made a special effort to look at the slides. So shortly thereafter, Dr. David Schlossman came in and started his comprehensive oncologic consultation. He saw my dad's wooden leg in the corner, and he said, what happened? My dad said, I stepped on a mine in World War II. Immediately, Dr. Schlossman stood up and put his hand over his heart. And he said, I want to personally thank you and thank all the men and women like you who preserved our freedom and preserved freedom for the rest of the world. And then he sat down. When he was finished, he said, we can't do chemotherapy, we can't do surgery, but I'm going to order radiation therapy to help you breathe easier. When he left the room, Dad said, he respects me. He did. Then, shortly thereafter, strangely enough, his cardiologist came in, Dr. Patricia Guerrero. She was an electrophysiologist, just what he needed for his pacemakers. She adjusted his drips the night he coded, and her eyes met his eyes, and she clasped his hand. And she said, your heart condition is stable. We can't do much for your cancer, but I'm going to come in every day and we'll take good care of you. And you can call me anytime you want, anytime you want. And she handed him a card with a telephone number on it. And tears came out of her eyes and tears came out of my dad's eyes. She had been his cardiologist. Now she was his doctor. When she left, my dad said she can be hard as nails or soft as a poached egg. Yes, yes, indeed. She had compassion on my dad, and he knew that she did. So the last 5 weeks were pretty hard for him. He was referred to hospice at the Harry S. Truman Memorial Veterans Affairs Hospital in Columbia, Missouri, where he spent the last 5 weeks. To the very end, the doctors and all of the healthcare professionals were very caring, respectful, and compassionate. That was their conviction, and that's a lift, I think. Thank you.